I've presided over hundreds of cases in my courtroom: custody disputes, adoption hearings, family law battles that tear homes apart. But I'd never seen a child's face change like that before. Not until the day Ava Mercer walked through my courtroom doors with her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, trailing behind her. Before we go any further, make sure you have subscribed to this channel for more powerful courtroom stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Also, comment below and tell us where you are watching this video from. Now, let me take you back to where this case truly began. It was a Tuesday morning in late October. Rain was hammering against the courthouse windows. That particular courtroom, the one on the 3rd floor with the old mahogany bench and the flickering fluorescent light in the corner, it had this weight to it that day. The kind of weight you feel before something breaks. Ava looked composed, too composed. Her hair was pulled back tight, almost painfully so. She wore a navy blazer, the kind a woman wears when she's been told what to wear. Her lipstick was perfect, not a crack, not a smudge. But her fingers were trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. Emma sat beside her, small enough that her feet didn't quite touch the floor. She was swinging them slowly, back and forth. Back and forth. That's the thing about children in courtrooms. They create their own language without speaking. They tell you everything with movement. The opposing counsel was Daniel Reeves, father of the child. He sat across from them with his lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Chen, who had that particular look about her, the one that suggested she'd won most of her cases through intimidation rather than evidence. The case file said it was a straightforward custody modification. Daniel was requesting full custody of Emma. The reason listed was vague: parental concerns regarding the child's welfare and stability. No specifics, just concerns. I read those files before every hearing. You learn to read between the lines of legal language. When a father asks for full custody without listing concrete allegations, it means one of two things. Either he's protecting someone from his own side, or the accusations are severe enough that they need to be presented carefully in court. Ava's hands were shaking worse now. I looked at Emma. She had stopped swinging her feet. She was staring at her mother with this intensity that shouldn't exist in a 7-year-old's eyes. Children that age usually stare at walls or toys or their own hands. They get bored. They fidget. Emma wasn't fidgeting. She was studying her mother like she was trying to memorize her face. That's when I felt it. That cold shift in the room's atmosphere. 24 years on the bench teaches you to recognize when something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. It's not always visible. It's not always in the words being spoken. Sometimes it's just the absence of something, the way air doesn't move quite right, the way breath becomes shallow. I called the case. Reeves versus Mercer, custody modification hearing. Ava stood. Emma stood with her. And that's when I noticed something that would stay with me for years. Emma didn't take her mother's hand. She stood beside her, but there was space between them, deliberate space, the kind of space a child creates when she's afraid of being close to someone. I didn't know then what that space meant. But I was about to find out. Daniel's lawyer opened first. She was methodical, clinical. She presented documents, school records showing Emma had missed 17 days in the past semester, medical records indicating the child had been treated for anxiety, a report from a therapist Emma had been seeing for 3 months, though neither parent had mentioned therapy during intake. But here's what I've learned about courtrooms over the decades. The documents don't lie, but they don't tell the whole story either. They're like photographs. They show you what was there, but not why it was there, not what the person holding the camera was feeling. Patricia Chen was building a narrative. Slowly, methodically, neglect, instability. A mother too consumed with her own problems to properly care for her daughter. I watched Ava's jaw tighten with each document. Her lawyer, a younger man named Marcus Webb, kept making notes, furious notes, the kind where the pen presses so hard you can hear the scratch of ink on paper across the entire courtroom. Then Patricia said something that made the air in the room change completely. We have testimony from the child's current therapist, Dr. Morrison, indicating that Emma has exhibited signs of emotional distress directly correlated with time spent in her mother's care. Ava's hand went to her mouth, just for a second, a microsecond, but I saw it. That's the thing about watching people testify under pressure. They can control their words, but they can't control their bodies. Pain changes the way people speak long before it changes the way they live. And fear shows up in the smallest places first. Marcus stood to cross-examine. He was good, aggressive but not reckless. He established that Emma had never been hospitalized, never been reported to Child Protective Services, never had any concerning marks or injuries. The school absences, Emma had been battling a chronic ear infection. The anxiety? Every child experiences anxiety, but something was happening that Patricia Chen had already anticipated. The judge, me, was starting to wonder why we were even here. If Daniel had nothing concrete, why would he risk his relationship with his daughter by pursuing full custody? That's usually when fathers like Daniel show their real hand. Your Honor, Patricia said, we'd like to call our first witness. The door to the courtroom opened. A woman walked in, mid-40s, brown hair. She wore jeans and a cardigan with the sleeves pushed up. She looked uncomfortable in her own skin. This is Margaret Hollis, Patricia announced, Emma's nanny for the past 2 years. Ava's body went rigid, completely rigid, like someone had switched off all the blood flow to her limbs. I've seen guilt in courtrooms before. I've seen it written across faces like a confession. But I'd also seen fear, and fear looks almost identical to guilt if you're not paying attention. The difference is subtle. Guilt comes with a certain resignation. Fear comes with anticipation. Fear means you know something worse is coming. Ava was afraid Margaret Hollis sat in the witness chair. She didn't look at Ava. She looked at Daniel. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to see there was something between them. Not necessarily romantic, though it could have been, but something, an alliance, a secret. Patricia began her questioning with the kind of gentleness that predators use with their prey. Margaret, you've worked in the Mercer household for 2 years. Can you describe the environment in which Emma lives? Margaret took a breath. It's difficult. Difficult how? Mercer has a lot of stress, a lot of anger. She yells frequently. Emma is often frightened. Marcus stood immediately. Objection. Speculation. The witness is testifying to the child's emotional state, not observable facts. I sustained it, but the damage was done. The jury, if there had been a jury, would have heard it. And juries hear what they need to hear to confirm what they already believe. But here's what struck me. As Margaret continued her testimony, she was being careful with her words, measured, like she'd been coached. And when Marcus cross-examined her, asking specific questions about incidents, she became vague. Dates became sometime last winter. Times became afternoon or evening. Details that should have been sharp became fuzzy. She was lying, but she was lying about something real. That was the most dangerous kind of lie. By the time Margaret left the stand, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted. Daniel sat back in his chair with this expression of quiet confidence. Patricia Chen allowed herself a small smile. Ava looked like she was suffocating. Then Marcus called her to testify. This is where everything should have been clarified. This is where a mother defends herself against accusations of harm toward her child. Ava stood. She walked to the witness stand, and as she sat down and placed her hand on the Bible, Emma watched her with those intense, unblinking eyes. Ava testified for 40 minutes. She was articulate, composed. She explained the ear infections. She explained the therapy as preventative care, not evidence of crisis. She admitted to stress. What parent doesn't experience stress, but denied ever creating an unsafe environment? But here's what I noticed as a judge who'd spent 2 decades reading people. Ava never looked at her daughter, not once. Emma, meanwhile, kept staring at her mother with this expression I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something more complicated. Something that looked almost like protection. That's an unusual expression for a child to direct at their mother. When Ava finished testifying, she stepped down. Emma watched her walk back to the table, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, Ava's hand reached toward her daughter as if to touch her hair. Emma leaned away. The motion was so slight that I doubt anyone else noticed it. But in a courtroom, silence and small movements are everything. They're the truth that words are trying to hide. I took a 30-minute recess. I needed to think. I needed to understand what I was actually witnessing, because the case file said one thing, the testimony said another, and Emma's body language was saying something entirely different. When we reconvened, I made a decision that would set everything in motion. "I'd like to speak with Emma," I announced, in chambers, without counsel present. Both lawyers objected immediately. Patricia Chen cited procedural standards. Marcus Webb cited potential bias. But I overruled them both. In family law, sometimes the law itself becomes an obstacle to justice. Sometimes procedure matters more than humanity, and that's when a courtroom becomes dangerous. I've learned that children tell the truth differently than adults. Adults construct narratives. They arrange facts into stories that protect themselves. Children just exist in what they know. They haven't learned to lie yet. Not really. Emma was brought into my chambers by a court officer. She looked smaller in that room. The chambers are wood-paneled, heavy with authority and age. The desk is large. The chair I sit in is high-backed and imposing. It's designed to intimidate adults. For a 7-year-old, it's a cathedral of power. I came around the desk and sat in a regular chair beside her instead. Sometimes the smallest gestures matter more than all the words in the world. "Emma," I said, "my name is Judge Harrison. You can call me Judge if you want to. Do you understand why you're here today?" She nodded. Her hands were folded in her lap. "Your dad wants to spend more time with you, and your mom wants you to stay with her mostly. Do you understand that?" Another nod. Still no words. "I need to ask you some questions, and I want you to tell me the truth, even if the truth is scary, even if you think it might hurt someone's feelings. Can you do that?" Emma looked up at me, and in that moment I saw something that made my chest tighten. She looked relieved, like someone had finally asked her permission to tell the truth. "Yes," she whispered. "Is your mom mean to you?" She hesitated. "This is important. Hesitation isn't the same as lying. Hesitation is thinking. It's a child weighing the consequences of honesty. Not mean," Emma said finally. "She's just sad all the time." "Sad how?" She cries in her room when she thinks I'm sleeping, and she drinks the brown stuff from the bottles. A lot. There it was. The thing the court file hadn't mentioned. The thing Margaret's vague testimony had been dancing around. Ava Mercer had an alcohol problem. "Does your mom ever hurt you when she drinks?" Emma shook her head. "No, she just forgets things. She forgets to pick me up from school sometimes. And one time she fell down the stairs and I had to call 911. My hands were very still. How did that make you feel?" "Scared," Emma said. "I thought she was dead." I took a moment, a real moment, because here's what I was realizing. This wasn't a custody case. This was a tragedy pretending to be a legal dispute. This was a mother spiraling into addiction, a child trying to hold things together, and a father who may or may not have known the full extent of the problem, trying to do what he thought was right, but there was still something wrong with the picture. Margaret's coaching, Daniel's confidence, the way this case had been constructed so carefully, so methodically. "Emma, do you want to live with your dad?" She looked down at her hands. "I don't want to leave my mom, even though she's sad and drinks. She's my mom," Emma said, and those 4 words contained more wisdom and heartbreak than most adults ever learn. "Has your dad talked to you about moving in with him?" She nodded slowly. "He said I could have my own room, and a dog, and that he'd take better care of me. How did that make you feel?" Emma's lip trembled slightly, like I was betraying her. I sat with that for a moment, because that's the real damage of custody battles. It's not about the law or the facts or the evidence. It's about forcing children to choose between the people who created them. It's about making love itself feel like betrayal. "Emma, I need to ask you something very important. Is there anything else you think I should know? Anything that makes you feel unsafe or scared?" She was quiet for a long time. long enough that I wondered if she was going to answer at all. Then she looked at me directly, and her eyes were older than 7. "My dad's girlfriend comes over a lot," she said. "And she's not very nice to my mom when my mom is sick. She says mean things." The girlfriend, Margaret. So that was the alliance I'd seen. Daniel had been with Margaret. Margaret had been feeding him information. And together they'd constructed a case that made Ava look unfit. But here's what I was realizing. They weren't entirely wrong. Ava wasn't fit. Not because she was cruel, but because she was drowning. And when you're drowning, you can't save anyone else, not even your own child. I thanked Emma and had her taken back to the courtroom. But I didn't reconvene the hearing immediately. Instead, I called both attorneys into my chambers. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room," I said. "Ms. Mercer has a substance abuse problem that directly impacts her ability to care for her daughter. However, this case has been presented in a way that's designed to obscure the real issue, which is treatment and safety, not custody warfare." Patricia Chen's face remained neutral. Marcus Webb's face flushed with anger. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "if my client has a substance abuse issue, that's something we need to address through rehabilitation, not—" "I'm not finished," I interrupted. "I'm ordering a comprehensive evaluation. Emma will be placed in temporary protective custody with a neutral third party, her maternal grandmother. I assume she exists." Marcus nodded. "That's where she'll stay while her mother enters a mandatory rehabilitation program. If Ms. Mercer completes treatment successfully, we'll revisit custody. If she doesn't," I paused, "then we'll reassess." Patricia started to object, but I cut her off. "And Ms. Chen, let me be clear about something. Using a child as a pawn in an adult conflict is something I take very seriously. Margaret Hollis's testimony was coached. The case was constructed to exploit a real problem rather than solve it. I'm noting all of this in my decision. What I didn't say out loud, what I couldn't say in chambers because it would have been inappropriate, was that I understood Ava now. I understood her completely. She wasn't a bad mother. She was a suffering human being who'd made terrible choices while suffering, and those choices had consequences. Real, devastating consequences for a child who loved her anyway. But when I went back into the courtroom to announce my decision, something happened that I will never forget. I called the courtroom back to order. The rain outside had intensified. It was hammering against the windows now with an almost violent rhythm. The fluorescent light in the corner was still flickering. Everything felt like it was about to break. Before I announced my decision, I said, "I'd like Emma to return to the courtroom." There was confusion. This wasn't standard procedure. Emma had already testified in chambers, which itself was unusual. But I had a reason. I needed to see something. Emma was brought back in. She walked to the space between the two tables where her parents sat. She was so small, 7 years old and bearing the weight of 2 adults' failures. I looked at Ava first. "Mrs. Mercer, I've made a determination in this case, but before I announce it, I need to ask you something directly in front of your daughter. And I need you to be absolutely honest." Ava's hands were shaking again. She knew. Somehow, she knew that Emma had told me something, that the secret was out. "Do you have a substance abuse problem?" The courtroom went silent. Complete silence. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat. Ava didn't answer immediately. She looked at Emma. And I watched her daughter's face change. There was fear there, yes, but there was also something else. Hope, maybe. The hope that finally someone was asking the right question. "Yes," Ava said quietly, "I do." Her voice broke on the word. That single admission, that single moment of truth, seemed to drain something out of her. Her shoulders collapsed inward. "For how long?" 2 years, she whispered. "Since my husband left." Daniel flinched. He hadn't known it was that long. "And during that time, have you sought treatment?" "No." Ava's voice was barely audible now. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to believe it was that bad. I thought if I just kept functioning, if I kept getting Emma to school and fed, and I thought I could manage it. But you couldn't. "No," Ava said. And then she did something that changed the entire courtroom. She looked directly at her daughter. "Emma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You deserved better than this. You deserved a mother who wasn't drowning. Emma's face crumpled. I could see the moment her 7-year-old brain processed what was happening. Her mother was finally acknowledging the thing they both knew, but had never spoken aloud. The secret that had lived between them like a third person in every room. I raised my hand before Emma could respond, because what I was about to do required absolute clarity. Here is my decision, I announced. Emma will be placed in the temporary custody of her maternal grandmother, Sarah Mercer, effective immediately. Ms. Ava Mercer will be required to complete a comprehensive substance abuse treatment program, inpatient, 90 days minimum. She will submit to regular drug testing. She will attend mandatory counseling. Patricia Chen started to stand, but I wasn't finished. However, I continued, this is not a permanent custody transfer. Upon successful completion of treatment, we will reconvene. At that time, if all evaluations indicate that Ms. Mercer has maintained sobriety and has addressed the underlying trauma that led to her substance abuse, primary custody will return to her. I turned to Daniel. Mr. Reeves, you will have supervised visitation with Emma during this period. The supervision is not a punishment for you. It's a protection for your daughter while both parents are in crisis and trying to heal. Then I did something that wasn't in any legal handbook. I spoke directly to Emma. Emma, what's about to happen might feel scary. You're going to stay with your grandmother for a while, and your mom is going to go somewhere to get help. This isn't because you did something wrong. This isn't because your mom doesn't love you. This is because your mom loves you so much that she's willing to get help. Do you understand? Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. Your mom is going to get better, I said, and when she does, you'll be together again. I don't know if that was true. I couldn't know that. But in that moment, a 7-year-old needed to believe there was light on the other side of this darkness. And sometimes a judge's job is to create that light, even if you can't guarantee it will last. What happened next, I wasn't prepared for. Emma stood up. She walked across the courtroom, not toward her father, not toward her grandmother who'd been called as an emergency contact. She walked to her mother, and she hugged her. Ava collapsed, completely fell apart. Her body convulsed with sobs, the kind of crying that only happens when someone finally stops pretending and lets themselves feel everything at once. The courtroom was silent except for her crying. Even the rain seemed to pause. Even the fluorescent light stopped flickering. I watched Marcus Webb wipe his eyes. I watched Daniel Reeves look away, ashamed. I watched Patricia Chen's carefully constructed case crumble into irrelevance, because what was happening in that courtroom had nothing to do with legal procedure. It had to do with human suffering finally being acknowledged. The court officer moved forward gently. Ava released Emma. She held her daughter's face in her hands and whispered something I couldn't hear. Emma whispered something back. Then Emma was led away by her grandmother, and Ava watched her go with an expression I'd seen only a few times in my career, the expression of someone who finally understood the cost of their choices and who was willing to pay it. This court is adjourned, I said. But as everyone stood to leave, something caught my attention. I looked at the chair where Emma had been sitting. She'd left something behind, a small stuffed animal, a worn rabbit with one ear slightly bent. I picked it up, and without thinking, without any real planning, I handed it to Ava as she was being escorted from the courtroom. She'll want this, I said quietly. Ava took it. She held it like it was the most fragile thing in the world, because to her, it probably was. It was the only part of her daughter she could hold while her daughter healed from her. As she left the courtroom, I noticed something about her that hadn't been visible before. Without the composed facade, without the perfect lipstick and the tight hair, she looked younger. She looked like someone who'd been carrying a weight so heavy that she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. I went back to my chambers. I didn't have another case scheduled that day. I sat at my desk and I thought about what I'd witnessed. This is what people don't understand about family law. It's not about winners and losers. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about systems that are broken and people who are drowning in those systems and children who are caught in the current. Justice isn't what happens in a courtroom. Justice is what happens after. Justice is whether someone gets the help they need, whether they take that help, whether they become the person their child deserves. I didn't know if Ava would make it through treatment. I didn't know if she'd stay sober. I didn't know if Emma would ever completely heal from this. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. In that moment when Emma hugged her mother, something true had happened. Something that no legal proceeding could manufacture or destroy. The love was still there, and sometimes that's the only thing a courtroom can actually protect. 3 months later, I received a letter. It was forwarded through the courthouse, sealed in an envelope with my name written in careful, deliberate handwriting. The handwriting of someone who'd had time to think about every word. Inside was a single page and a photograph. The letter was from Ava. Your Honor, it began, I completed my 90-day treatment program 2 weeks ago. I'm writing to tell you that I'm still sober. I go to meetings 4 times a week. I see a therapist who specializes in addiction and trauma. I've learned things about myself that I'd been running from for years. But more than that, I wanted you to know what your decision meant. Not the legal decision, though that mattered too. I mean, the moment you asked me directly about my drinking. The moment you didn't let me hide anymore. I'd spent 2 years lying to everyone, including myself. I told myself I was a good mother. I told myself I was functioning. I told myself that if I just kept moving forward, everything would be fine. But Emma knew the truth. She'd been living in that truth every single day while I pretended. When you asked me that question in front of her, something broke open. And breaking was the only way I could actually heal. I've had supervised visits with Emma twice a week. She's still cautious with me. She should be. But last week, she did something that made me understand what real forgiveness might look like. We were sitting in the visitation room, and she asked me if I was going to drink again. I told her the truth, that I don't know what the future holds, but that I'm choosing every single day not to. And she said, I know. I can tell because you don't smell like the brown stuff anymore. A 7-year-old's measure of recovery, not blood tests or court-ordered evaluations. Just whether her mother smells like herself again. I'm enclosing a photograph from last week's visit. I wanted you to see. I opened the photograph. It showed Ava and Emma sitting together on a bench in what looked like a park. They weren't smiling. Not exactly. But Emma's head was leaning against her mother's shoulder, and Ava's hand was on her daughter's back. The posture wasn't forced. It was natural. It was what safety looks like when it's being rebuilt one day at a time. I sat with that letter and that photograph for a long time. Here's what I want you to understand about family law. The system isn't designed to create healing. It's designed to create decisions, to separate what should be separated, to protect what needs protecting. But healing? That only happens when someone decides they're willing to change. When they reach a breaking point, and instead of breaking completely, they break open. I called a reconvening hearing for the custody modification case. When Ava walked into the courtroom this time, she was different. Her shoulders were straight. Her eyes were clear. She'd gained weight, the kind of healthy weight that comes when you're eating regularly again, sleeping without chemical assistance. Her hair was down instead of pulled back. She looked like someone who'd stopped running. Emma was with her grandmother in the observation area. We'd agreed that the child shouldn't be present for this hearing. Some things need to be decided by adults, without the weight of a child's presence influencing the outcome. Daniel and Patricia Chen sat on the other side. Daniel looked uncomfortable. His lawyer looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Ms. Mercer, I began, you've completed your court-ordered treatment program. Can you tell this court what that experience was like? And Ava did something remarkable. She didn't minimize it. She didn't make it sound like it had been easy or that she'd conquered addiction like it was an opponent she'd defeated. She told the truth about how difficult it had been, how many times she'd wanted to leave the program, how hard it was to face the things she'd been running from. I had to acknowledge that I'd failed my daughter, Ava said, not because I didn't love her, but because I loved her and still chose alcohol anyway. That's the hardest part of recovery, understanding that you hurt the people you love most. I watched Daniel's expression shift. Something in his face softened because he was recognizing something real in her testimony. He was recognizing that she wasn't making excuses. She was accepting responsibility. Have you maintained sobriety since completing the program? I asked. Yes, Your Honor, 114 days. Do you understand that sobriety isn't about the number of days, that it's about a daily choice? I do now, Ava said. Every morning I wake up and I choose not to drink. And every night I go to sleep knowing I made that choice. That's what recovery is. Not perfection, just daily choice. I reviewed her treatment records. Therapy notes showed genuine progress. Drug testing showed consistent results. Her therapist had written a detailed assessment indicating that while Ava still had work to do, she demonstrated real commitment to change. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Ms. Mercer, are you ready to be Emma's primary caregiver again? Ava's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. She met my gaze directly. I'll be ready for the rest of my life, she said. I'll never be perfect. There will be hard days, but I will never again choose something over my daughter. That's what I learned in treatment. That recovery isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming the person your loved ones deserve. I made my ruling. Primary custody is returned to Ms. Ava Mercer, effective immediately. Mr. Reeves, you will have visitation rights as established in the original custody agreement. Ms. Mercer will continue her treatment program indefinitely, weekly therapy sessions, ongoing support group attendance, and monthly drug testing for the next 12 months. I paused. This was the part that wasn't standard procedure, but I'd learned that sometimes the law needed to bend slightly to accommodate humanity. Ms. Mercer, I want to say something that isn't part of the official record, so I'm speaking to you now as a human being, not as a judge. Recovery isn't linear. There will be hard moments. There will be moments when you want to give up, when you feel like you're failing again. In those moments, I want you to remember something. Ava was listening with complete attention. Your daughter hugged you in my courtroom when you were at your lowest point. She didn't abandon you. She didn't judge you. She just loved you. That's not something you earned through recovery. That's something you had all along. Don't forget that on the hard days. What I didn't expect was what happened next. Ava stood up, and she approached the bench, which is something people don't typically do without permission. The court officer moved toward her, but I waved him off. She stood there, looking at me, and I could see her struggling with what to say. Finally, she just said, "Thank you for seeing me, not the addiction, not the failure, just me." And I understood then what the real role of a judge is. It's not to punish, it's not to win cases. It's to see people clearly enough that they can start to see themselves. The hearing concluded. Ava left the courtroom, and I knew she was going to get Emma. I knew there would be a moment, probably in a car or a kitchen or a quiet room, where mother and daughter would hold each other, and both of them would understand that they'd been given something rare, a second chance. But here's what I want you to understand about this case. It didn't end perfectly. Recovery never does. 3 months later, Ava had a relapse. A single night where the pain got too heavy and she drank. She immediately told her therapist. She increased her treatment frequency, and she told Emma the truth. "I made a mistake," she told her daughter. "I drank one night, but I didn't let the mistake become a choice to keep going." That's what real recovery looks like, not perfection. Just the daily commitment to be better than you were yesterday. 2 years have passed since that day in my courtroom. I've presided over hundreds of cases since then. Custody battles, divorces, adoptions, guardianship disputes. Each one carries its own weight. Each one stays with me in different ways. But the Mercer case, it never left. Last month, I received another letter. This one came with a school photograph. Emma is 9 now. In the photograph, she's smiling genuinely. the kind of smile that comes from a child who's learned to trust again. She's standing next to her mother, and Ava's arm is around her shoulder with the ease of someone who no longer flinches at physical contact. The letter was shorter this time. Your Honor, Emma wanted me to send you this. She's in 4th grade now. She made the honor roll last semester. She has friends. She plays soccer. She's normal in the way that only children who've survived something difficult can be. I'm still sober, still in therapy, still going to meetings. Some days are harder than others, but I keep choosing. Every single day, I choose. But I wanted to write because Emma asked me to. She asked if she could write to you herself, but I told her I'd help her say what she wanted to say. She wanted you to know that she forgives you. I had to read that sentence 3 times before it made sense. She forgives you. But I hadn't done anything that required forgiveness. I'd simply asked the right questions at the right moment. Then I understood. Emma wasn't forgiving me, she was forgiving her mother. And she wanted me to know that forgiveness had happened, that healing had happened, that the broken system of family law had somehow, despite its limitations, created space for grace. I looked at that photograph for a long time, at the ease between mother and daughter, at the absence of fear, at the presence of something that looked like trust being rebuilt. This is what I've come to understand after 24 years as a judge. Justice isn't what happens in the courtroom. Justice is what happens after. It's whether someone gets a second chance, whether they take it, whether they become worthy of the love that's been offered to them despite their failures. The law can separate people. The law can protect children. The law can mandate treatment and enforce consequences, but the law cannot create redemption. Redemption is something only humans can do for themselves. Ava Mercer redeemed herself. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but genuinely. And in doing so, she gave her daughter something more valuable than any court decision could provide. She gave her a mother who chose her every single day, even when choosing was difficult. I think about that moment in my courtroom constantly, when Emma hugged her mother. When the entire weight of the legal system seemed to pause and 2 humans just held each other. That's when I understood something fundamental about my job. A judge doesn't create justice. A judge creates conditions where justice can happen. We create space. We ask the right questions. We refuse to let people hide from the truth. And then we step back and let humans do what they do best. Choose to love each other anyway. Pain changes people. Addiction destroys families. Legal systems can be clumsy and incomplete. But love, real, messy, imperfect love, has the power to rebuild what was broken. Emma is 9 years old. She has no idea that her case became something I've carried with me every single day since. She has no idea that her mother's recovery, her willingness to choose her daughter, became a reminder to me about why I do this work. She just knows that her mother loves her. That's enough. And maybe that's all justice ever really is. The knowledge that we've been loved despite our failures, that we've been given a second chance, that the people we hurt have chosen to forgive us, not because we deserve it, but because love is stronger than the systems that try to protect us from it. I still have that stuffed rabbit. The one Emma left behind in my courtroom. It sits on a shelf in my chambers, beside other objects people have forgotten, wedding rings, car keys, photographs. But that rabbit means something different to me than the rest. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest objects carry the largest truths. If this story stayed with you, make sure you're subscribed for more courtroom stories like this one. And before you go, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I always want to know how far these stories travel. Because stories like Ava and Emma's deserve to be witnessed. They deserve to remind us that redemption is possible, that second chances exist. That love, in the end, is the only law that actually matters. This is Judge Harrison. And this is the case that changed the way I see my job.